Okay, so today we're going deep, really deep into a situation that I think is going to be really eye-opening for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely.
And we're talking about Kenya,
Yeah.
right? And specifically, we're looking at human rights
Yeah.
there. And, obviously a very complex issue with a lot of layers, a lot of history, and a lot going on. But the thing that we're going to focus on today is we got this report. And this report is really kind of a deep dive into abductions that have been happening recently.
Yeah.
And, what the government's response has been or hasn't been.
Right.
And the reason that this is so fascinating is because if you remember, when Ruto was campaigning,
Yeah.
he was talking a big game about protecting human rights and, really changing things.
Absolutely.
And now that he's in power, things seem to be, taking a bit of a different turn.
Yeah. And that's, it's so classic, right? That shift from being the critic to being the leader, being the one in charge.
Right.
And, it's rarely a smooth transition, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, if we think back to the campaign, his words were, they were powerful. I don't know if you remember, but he spoke about, the container at the Nairobi area police station, and he actually used the word slaughtered.
Wow.
And that imagery, I mean, it was chilling.
Right?
And it really underscored the urgency of his message.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear something like that, like a container where people are being slaughtered, you have to think something's seriously wrong.
Exactly.
And it makes you think, what changed? I mean, we had this really strong message about human rights.
Yeah.
And then there's been this really noticeable shift. And it seems like now all the focus is on these anti-tax protests that are happening.
Right.
And I mean, those are huge too, like a lot of unrest.
Absolutely. And that's really the context of where a lot of these concerning allegations of these abductions have been coming up, right?
Exactly. And the thing is that Ruto himself has actually kind of, I don't know if I want to say added fuel to the fire,
Yeah.
but he definitely, stirred things up when he was at one of these protests.
Right.
And publicly asked for names of anyone who's gone missing
Yeah.
after these demonstrations,
Yeah.
essentially saying, I don't know about any abductions happening.
Yeah. And that's what makes you wonder, right? Is this just a genuine request for information? He's just trying to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
Or was this a calculated move to deflect responsibility?
Right.
Could it point to a deeper issue, right? Like a lack of control over the security forces? I mean, it's tough to say for sure, right?
Yeah.
It definitely raises some red flags about transparency within the government.
Exactly. Because, I mean, if he really doesn't know what's going on, that's just as concerning as if he's trying to cover it up.
Exactly.
And this is where I think things get really, really dark.
Okay.
So at the same time that Ruto's making this statement, asking for information,
Right.
the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, so this is a pretty big deal, they released a report.
Yeah.
And this report confirms 39 deaths
Right.
during those protests.
During the protests.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes you wonder, was this purposeful? Like he was trying to deflect attention? Or is there just this serious communication breakdown within his own government?
Right.
I mean, either way, it's bad.
Right.
But it definitely casts a shadow over their commitment to transparency, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And the thing is that the report goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
It's not just about the protests.
Right.
It's about how the government has been targeting critics online.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking about people like journalists, bloggers, people who are speaking out against the government.
And so are these like arrests or?
Well, there's been a lot of intimidation.
Okay.
A lot of, I guess you could say, harassment. People having their accounts shut down.
Oh, wow.
Just basically trying to silence these dissenting voices.
And these are people who are specifically criticizing the government.
Yeah, I mean, one case that really stood out to me was this blogger named Paul. And he frequently criticizes the government, especially about their economic policies.
Okay.
And he posted this article that was, really critical.
Right.
And then he just disappeared.
Like completely disappeared.
Completely disappeared.
Wow.
His family hasn't heard from him. Nobody knows where he is.
That's really concerning.
And it's not just him. There are other cases
Right.
of people who have, spoken out against the government and then just vanished.
I mean, with these disappearances and then, on top of the deaths that have been happening during the protests,
Right.
it paints a really worrisome picture.
Yeah.
I mean, is this a sign that they're slipping back into the same patterns that Ruto himself condemned?
Right.
I mean, if so, the consequences could be dire.
So what are we talking about? Like, what kind of consequences?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, this kind of crackdown on dissent, it has a chilling effect on free speech.
Right.
So people become afraid to speak out. Yeah. Journalists, they're intimidated into silence.
Yeah.
So the space for peaceful dissent shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, right?
So it's basically like they're creating an environment where the only option left is violence.
Exactly. And then you have this erosion of trust in the government.
Right.
Right. If the government is seen as silencing its critics, then who can you trust?
So this whole situation it's incredibly complex. It's a very, very dark situation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our listeners might be, listening to this and thinking, well, what can I do?
Yeah, it's a natural response. Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, awareness is key, right?
Right.
Staying informed about what's happening in Kenya is crucial.
So basically, just keep learning.
Yeah, I mean, follow the news, read reports like the one we're talking about today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do your own research, stay informed.
Okay, so awareness. What else?
I think supporting organizations that are on the ground there doing the work is really important. Groups like the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, they're the ones who are investigating these abuses.
Okay. Yeah.
They're providing support to victims and, really trying to hold the government accountable.
So donate or volunteer, things like that.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
And then lastly, don't underestimate the power of your voice. I mean, contact your elected officials, express your concerns, because that kind of pressure, it can actually make a difference.
I mean, it's hard to believe that just, sending an email or making a phone call can really change things.
I know, it seems small, but
Yeah.
when enough people speak up, it can put real pressure on governments to uphold their human rights obligations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So keep learning. Support the organizations that are on the ground and speak up.
Exactly.
Okay. Man, this is some heavy stuff.
It is.
But I think it's a really important reminder that, progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes things take a turn for the worse.
Absolutely.
And this situation in Kenya really makes you think about the challenges of political transitions.
Right.
Even when a leader is promising change.
Yeah, and it also makes you think about what our responsibility is as citizens to hold those leaders accountable to their promises, especially when it comes to things like fundamental human rights.
And those are really big questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers, but I hope this deep dive has given our listeners some food for thought and maybe some ideas about how to get involved.
Me too. Like you said, it's complex, but the more we talk about it, the more we learn about it, the better chance we have of making a positive impact.
Absolutely. To keep the conversation going, folks.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See ya.